Hi, this is Kevin for Pixavert.com. In this video we're going to be creating a 3D gear icon. Now for some of you Photoshop overachievers, you should be able to do this in previous versions of Photoshop, but for us mere mortals we're going to need Photoshop CS6 to do this because it's a lot easier to do 3D in Photoshop CS6. Now just going to remind you, you do need the extended version of Photoshop to access the 3D menu. However, the first part of this video is going to be creating a custom shape, and you can do that in any version of Photoshop. This is a lot easier to do in Photoshop CS6 than in previous versions of Photoshop. I'm not going to be trying to recreate this exactly because it's a bit ornate. I could have done something really bland and then replicated it exactly. But we've got a little bit of fancy stuff going on in this design. I'm not going to be able to replicate it exactly, but I'll show you the general technique and then you can take it in any direction that you prefer. So I'm not going to get rid of this, I'm just going to switch that off. We'll go to the standard workspace and I might come back and use this as a reference, but for the time being we'll just start off with the basic shape. So I'm going to use the ellipse tool to create a circle. That's holding down shift to get the circle in proportion, and maybe I'm going to choose a blue to work with. I'm going to duplicate the circle, Control or Command T to transform it, and I'm going to accept the transformation and change the color so that we can see exactly what we're doing. The next step is not going to make much sense until a bit later on. I'm going to select the two shapes and using the move tool I'm going to center them. I'm going to choose select all from the menu, and then we can use the alignment options to align this to the center of the document. Select deselect, and we can now continue with the transformations. I'm going to work on the top circle, and what we need to do here is to do a free transform and a duplicate at the same time, and that's the key combination Control Alt and T or Command Option and T. I'm going to resize this holding down Shift and Alt or Shift and Option, and take this to the top holding down Shift so that it snaps to the edge of the larger circle. Then just complete the transformation and accept that. The next thing I want to do is to make copies of this and to rotate them around this larger circle. So once again that's going to be Control Alt and T. Now to get the rotation around the larger circle I need to move the rotation point or the anchor point to the center of the document, and that's done by moving this little crosshair. The center of the document, this is a document of 1280 by 720, so the center of the document is 640 by 360, and entering it there allows me to get the exact position that I need. Now I can do the rotation. If I hold down Shift I'll get a perfect rotation. However, if I come to this box here and enter a figure that divides exactly into 360, I can enter a rotation angle of my choosing. So I'm going to enter -20 and accept that. And to complete the pattern, it's the special keystroke Control Alt Shift and T or Command Option Shift and T, and you just keep on pressing T until the pattern completes. What we now need to do is to select all these new shapes, and I'm going to use the black path tool to select all these shapes. We're going to merge them using merge shape components, and now we need to merge these two layers. So I'm going to select both layers, right click and choose merge shapes, and then we'll go back to the top menu and choose subtract front shapes, and that gives us a cool looking gear icon. We are going to go to merge shapes, and that gives us one new shape. Now at this stage what you could do if you wanted to is to create a kind of a 3D effect using layer styles, maybe a little bit of bevel and emboss, and you can have a pretty snazzy looking gear icon that way. Or we can go into the 3D panel and do some 3D extrusion. I'm going to get rid of the layer effects and we'll go to the 3D panel. Now I've already got a 3D workspace, a custom 3D workspace, so I'm going to choose that. What we really need is the 3D panel, which you can choose from the window menu. But before we carry on, I'm actually going to change the name of this layer. I'm going to change the name of the layer to gear, and then we're going to choose 3D extrusion and create, and that creates our cool looking 3D extrusion. If I click on the gear object, I can rotate it around so we can see what's going on here. As you can see, it is pretty long. We need to shorten the length a little bit, so I'm just going to rotate it like that, and we'll do our first edit. I'm going to go to deform, and I'm going to enter in an extrusion depth. Let's say 50. 50 looks good. The next thing I want to do is to get rid of all the shadows here. We're creating an icon, we don't need any shadows. So I'm going to go to environment, switch off IBL, we don't need that. I'm going to go to gear and switch off catch shadows and cast shadows. And I'm actually going to switch off the shadows in the infinite light, in the default infinite light. We don't need those shadows. The next thing I want to do is to duplicate the infinite light so that we get a little bit more depth and variation going on with the lighting. This second infinite light I'm going to use just to cast some shade and highlights into the teeth of the gear. Around there looks fine. What I want to do now is to do an edit which you might want to miss out, but I think it generally works out well. I'm going to go to the gear front inflation, and I'm going to remove the diffuse texture. For some reason Photoshop introduces a diffuse texture. Don't know why that is, but I like to remove these textures, and I'm going to do that for all the different parts of this particular shape. So that's the diffusion for the extrusion and the bevels, and finally from the back inflation. The next thing I want to do is to just change the colors up for the materials. So I'm going to go to the front inflation material, maybe choose a cool looking blue color there. That's fine. Maybe change the specular a little bit. That's cool. And I'm going to go to the front bevel, choose a slightly brighter color, and we'll go to the extrusion and choose slightly darker gray, and we'll choose highlights that are a little bit brighter just to add a bit of depth to the extrusion. Now the next thing I want to do is to work on the bevel. So once again I'll go to the gear object and we'll go to the cap, and here what I want to do is just try and come up with some settings that will look good for this particular design. I'm not going to try and replicate exactly what I did last time. And you can go and work on the bevel and just maybe try and create a fancy looking contour for your bevel that sometimes produces pretty decent looking effects. When you're working on the contour, you can either create a corner, which can give you this kind of effect, or you can create the standard point, and the standard point allows you to work with curves. I'm going to go with corners for this one, and we'll just mock something up fairly roughly, and I'll hit OK to that. Maybe extend the width a little bit, mess around with the angle. That's looking pretty snazzy. As you can see, there's a lot of variety, there's a lot of options that you can mess around with here. We'll do a render, see what that looks like. I would say that looks pretty neat. So you can see it's a very simple, straightforward process, and you've got a lot of options to tweak the design whichever way you want to throw it. You can come up with something very simple or something a bit more fancy and ornate like this. Now what I want to do is to show you something else which you might be interested in. If we go to the gear and choose the mesh tab, there is what's known as a shape preset, and what we can do here is to actually create a new extrusion preset. So I'm going to call this gear icon 2, and what I'm going to do is to call up the previous preset which I created for that first shape. As you can see there, that gives us an appearance which is quite similar to that first shape that I came up with. So you can create your own presets, save them, and call them up for later on. So that's editing a 3D gear in Photoshop CS6. Possible in previous versions of Photoshop, but takes a bit more effort. because Photoshop CS6 is that much easier to use. Finally, if you're a complete novice to Photoshop, I might as well show you how we can actually export this. You'd continue rendering it until it looks decent, and once you're done, switch off the background, maybe choose image trim, select transparent pixels, and then you get your little box there. We can then go to File, Save for Web, and in order to save transparency, we can choose GIF, PNG 8, my own favorite, which is PNG 24, which produces the best kind of transparency. We go for JPEG, we don't get any transparency. Now you'll find some of the older browsers aren't able to support PNG, but I think all the modern browsers do support PNG files. So if you wanted to export this to use on a website, this is how you could do it to preserve your transparency in the background. You can resize the image using the image size panel down here. Just hit save and you're done. I'm going to cancel out of there and undo those couple of changes. And we'll finish off here, maybe continue rendering that. So I hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments area below. But I hope you found a few useful tips there. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Take care. See you then. Bye.